Humanity and society have evolved so much over the thousands of years we've been around. We've seen civilizations rise and fall, a mixture of great and awful rulers, and advancements in many fields as well. One of the most fascinating parts of society are the languages we have invented, though many of them have since died off. I'm here to tell you about some of them as we count down the top 10 dead languages from history that you didn't know about. At number 10, Latin. Out of all of the dead languages, Latin is probably one of the most well known. You might be saying, well, it isn't completely dead because Latin is still somewhat around in society. While you do have a point, Latin is still considered a dead language because no one speaks it. It is still used to classify animal species in science and is also used in medical terms as well, but you won't hear someone speaking Latin just out and about. The most Latin that the average person would use in normal everyday speech would be saying some kind of Latin phrase like carpe diem, which means seize the day, or memento mori, which means remember you must die. Certainly not as upbeat as carpe diem, but it's still got the same principle. These days, the only country that uses Latin as their official language is the Vatican. And yes, for those who never knew this, Vatican City is its own country. The reason why Latin is their official language is because the Holy Scriptures are written in this dead language. They are the only ones who have kept up with it after the language started dying out after the fall of Rome. At number 9, Sanskrit. The ancient language Sanskrit is the oldest language in the world, but unfortunately the language died out around 600 BCE, so a very long time ago. Though it died out so long ago, it still seems to be holding on a little bit, even in modern day in some countries. Currently, Sanskrit is considered one of India's official languages because of the fact that many ancient scriptures regarding Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism are written in this ancient language. Sanskrit also holds on to a lot of popularity among scholars, as it is a popular study for many students because of its ties to many ancient philosophical works like the spiritual and medical theories written by the popular philosopher Vedas. Before we carry on talking about some of humanity's dead languages, why not consider leaving a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this one. On number 8, Ancient Greek. Up next we have a pretty special language, this being Ancient Greek. Many people still study some Ancient Greek because of the works of some of Ancient Greece's most famous philosophers like Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, and Homer. On top of that, much like Latin, many scientific terminologies are written in Ancient Greek. Now, I mentioned that this is a pretty special language, so let me tell you about what makes it so unique. The death of Ancient Greek is pretty special because it didn't necessarily die out completely. Strange, I know. You see, rather than the language dying out completely, it simply got transformed into what we now know as Modern Greek. So really, it's not exactly the same, but it just evolved into something new. Now, Modern Greek is used as the official language of Greece. Even though the language, or rather some of its remnants, are still around, Ancient Greek is still studied to this day, and fun fact, many words from the English language are derived from Ancient Greek. At number 7, Biblical Hebrew. The death of the Biblical Hebrew language is a pretty sad one. There are many ways for a culture or language to die out, and most times it has to do with some kind of conflict, overtaking, or assimilation. In the case of Biblical Hebrew, this language died out in the 20th century due to warfare and persecution. Biblical Hebrew initially saw its decline after the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem, but after the events of World War II and the persecution of the Jewish population, Biblical Hebrew lost any hope of returning. Most of the rabbis who could have passed along this language died during the war, and so this ancient 8,000-word language transformed into Modern Hebrew. It is still possible to learn the language, but no one really uses it anymore. One cool thing about learning this language though is the fact that it would be a much easier language to pick up than any other dead language. At number 6, Old English. Obviously, we need to talk about the language that came before ours, that being Old English. This is the language that came before the modern English that we speak today, and even before the middle and early modern English that you may be familiar with if you ever had to study Shakespeare. It was the first recorded stage of the English language that was used and spoken up until approximately the 1150s. Old English had 3 genders to the language: masculine, neuter, and feminine. Old English, also referred to as Anglo-Saxon English, was spoken by people in England and Scotland. hence the name. Eventually, it evolved into a more grammatically correct version of English that we call Middle English, and this old form quickly died out, giving way to this newer version. The English language has undergone a lot of transformation over many years, so I wonder if you'll see another transition in this language in the future. At number 5, Coptic. When you think of the ancient Egyptian language, you would probably imagine the hieroglyphs that these ancient people were known for. Coptic was actually the final stage of the ancient Egyptian language before it was replaced with Arabic, and it was written using the Greek alphabet. Coptic was also considered to be the first ever Christian language. It was created as a result of 4 different languages, those being Greek, Demotic, Hieratic, and the hieroglyphs. For some time, Coptic was preserved as a religious language, but it died out after about 300 years. There are no languages out there that are even close to Coptic, making this one very unique. At number 4, Ayapaneco. Now this next language isn't exactly extinct, but it is severely endangered because there's only a small handful of people left in the world who still speak it. Ayapaneco is a critically endangered language that originated in Tabasco, Mexico. From what I understand, there are only 2 native speakers of this language left, but the issue is that those 2 people refuse to speak to each other and no one knows why, which is a bit mysterious. People say that they just don't get along, but again, the reason for that is unknown. The reason that this language has pretty much died off is because of the severe lack of native speakers. This is all thanks to 20th century Spanish educational reform, where children were forced to not speak in any other languages other than those which were approved. It's so sad that this language has pretty much gone all because of outsider influence. At number 3, Aramic. This next language is pretty special because it's one that is said to have been spoken by Jesus Christ himself. The Aramic language was, in its heyday, the primary language because it was so widely used. This language is also the one that replaced the highly complex Akkadien language, which we will talk about in a few moments. There are Aramic speakers, but none of them actually came from the country which this language originated. This dead language came from Aram, but the country fell to the Assyrians back in ancient times. However, despite the destruction of Aram, their language remained fairly intact as the Assyrians used it as a second language given its significance and popularity since it was the lingua franca of the Middle East. The reason that this language eventually died out was due to the diaspora of the people who spoke it. There was a point where some researchers feared that the language would be gone by the next century. However, thanks to the historical significance of the language, as well as the texts that still need to be researched in its language, Aramic still remains preserved, unused but not completely lost. At number 2, Old Norse. Now let's talk about the language that was used by one of the most interesting civilizations from the past. We all know about the Vikings. We've done a few videos about them on this channel so far, but no one has really talked about how they spoke, so let's get into it. The Vikings spoke Old Norse. It was unique to the Vikings, but it ultimately died off in a similar way to the Aramic language. As the Vikings split off and became individual groups, like Icelandic, Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, and Faroese, the language kind of just faded away over time. Though the entirety of Old Norse has been lost for the most part, some remnants still remain in the English language. Since both Old Norse and English stem from the Germanic family, they share similarities, and this is how we got words like cake, knife, and berserk. They came from the Vikings. On top of that, the word Thursday came from the Vikings' Thursday, as in the god, and the word husband came from Old Norse as well, as it was a mashup of the words hus and bondi. And finally, at number 1, Akkadien. The ancient language Akkadien originated in Akkad, an old Mesopotamian city from ancient times. This language was actually the first certified Semitic language in history. If you learned about Mesopotamia, then you would probably be familiar with its written form of the language called cuneiform. Akkadian was spoken by the likes of Mesopotamians, Babylonians, and Chaldeans. But unfortunately, due to the language's inability to evolve, it ultimately died out, as I mentioned when talking about Aramic, since that language was the one to replace Akkadian. This language is very much dead unless you want to learn cuneiform, which in that case you'd have to learn Akkadian as well. Before we wrap things up for today, I want you guys to leave a comment down below telling me which of these dead languages you wish you could have learned. For me, I think I would have liked to learn Latin because it just sounds so cool. But what about you guys? Leave me your thoughts down in the comments. Anyways, that's it for me. I've been your host, B-Room, and until next time, stay safe, make good choices, and stay sweet, bumblebees. When you think of the ancient okay. Like heretic those being Greek Demotic It's not that hard. Hieratic, that's it. Okay.